Hello, thank you for joining us and welcome to our latest roundtable discussion on secrecy in CGT manufacturing. Is it wise to keep what one knows to oneself to ensure success in a single company, or is the technology now advanced enough to share and thereby ensure sustainable success for the industry as a whole, as well as for generations to come? Here to share their thoughts and experiences are Dalip Sethi. He's the commercial leader for Cell Therapy Technologies North America at Terumo Blood and Cell Technologies. Heather Purvis. She's the Director of Clinical Operations at Title 21. Kevin Land, the Executive Medical Director of Biotherapies and Vice President of Clinical Services at Vitalant. Autonomous CEO Alexander Safe, and Josh Ludwig, the Global Director of Commercial Operations at Scale Ready. Now, Josh, you said that up to 90% of CGT manufacturing could be standardized. What types of data or processes should be the first to be universally shared? And what's stopping that from happening right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. Excited to be on the panel. And when we talk about this concept of up to 90% could be standardized, from our perspective, as a device reagent manufacturer, supplier, enabling these developers to manufacture their cell therapies, what we see is a very common thread of the manufacturing process, from incoming patient material to basically a formalized final product. Most of what is done within that cell production process are the same unit operations, possibly on different technology, possibly with some minor differences in maybe gene editing technology. But at the end of the day, there's tools that have existed now for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years that are used consistently across these developers for basically the cell production vessel, for the cell washing instrumentation, and even getting down into, say, the cell culture media and reagents. And what we see, I've been in a unique position here supporting our core technology, G-Rex, for about 13 years. The vast majority of these production processes are almost identical, and where people have a slight difference, oftentimes they're basically trying to make some unique part of their process, and they're actually making their process less efficient because they're trying to make their specific cell production process unique. So when we say up to 90% can be standardized, it's basically from cell activation, gene modification, rapid expansion, and then harvest and washing. There is really only a few core sets of tools that can and are used. And so one of the ways I think the field would do itself a big service is basically providing more clarity into how they use these tools, say, in sequence. And one of the last frontiers that we're working on now is basically standardizing the reagents and volumes of said reagents to sub-assembly. So I'm going to get into the minutia of like an operation, if you allow me. But if you're thinking about a lean manufacturing operation, you need to be able to bring in your materials to be used across, say, hundreds of patients coming through in a month or something like that. And as opposed to every single day you start a new patient, you're basically formulating all of your reagents and right sizing them. If you take the time and the thought to run your operation and basically kit all of your materials, and you're just bringing them off the shelf when your variability comes in, your patient material comes in. If everything else is standardized, your process is going to run a lot cleaner. And I would argue that the vast majority of cell and gene modified cell therapy groups could be standardizing that to the benefit of the whole industry.
Heather, do you agree with that?
Yeah, actually, honestly, and again, I echo the same sentiment. Thank you so much for having me on the panel. I'm in a really unique position with our company where I get to chat with folks from the start to the finish of implementation of our software. And so I get to go in and do some mapping of their workflows, whether that's in a standard of care lab or a manufacturing space. And Josh isn't wrong. A lot of what we're seeing and hearing is that there's redundancy through the use of equipment or reagents or other consumables. I think one solid way to overcome some of this, because we know that everybody has that feeling that their information and their workflows are proprietary, right? We do this a little bit better than anybody else. That's why we're in business. That's why we're special. Yes, absolutely. So generalize the data that is coming out of there enough so that we can still continue to utilize that across the continuum, right? I'm a clinician. I've been within the clinical space my entire career. We thrive off of knowledge sharing and data sharing. You know, white papers are where we live. That's how we learn. Conferences and roundtables such as this is how we gain additional knowledge so that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not starting from scratch. And in order to do that, we have to have this information. We have to be able to push it out. If you feel like you need to goal keep a little bit, that's fine. Respect. But there are ways to be able to generalize the data a little bit more so that we can do an apples to apples and allow that to be able to push out to other folks. And I think that's where, you know, some of these digital solutions such as ours, it kind of comes into play, so that we can give you a common language to be able to share that information.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Alexander, I'm aware that you're a big fan of data. Care to chime in there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both my colleagues, and it's great to be here, by the way, with esteemed colleagues around the table, and really happy to spend a Friday with you. I think the standardization is absolutely key, not to repeat the same thing all over again. It's a key. We don't need that inefficiency in the industry. But I always say, what is in the mind, it resides in the mind of the person holding it, and what is out in the digital can be benefit for others. So I would say, digitization, what we embark upon in Autonomous, but also Title 21 and other colleagues, is essential for that standardization effort. You don't have it digital, it's not a good to have, it's a must. And the sooner you start, the better possibility you have. And Josh is absolutely right. Sometimes you make the things too complicated, and I don't understand. This is a tendency of humanity, by the way. We always go the long way, and as I remember in math, they always say the straight way is the shortest and the curvy way is the longest, but we never tend to follow that in life. So today, I mean, one of the initiatives that we are contributing to, we call it for Act for Hope, and we get like about 40 thought leaders, and we go around the table and we say, what is it that we can do for industry to bring the industry agnostic to autonomous to prosperity, and ultimately fulfill the goal and mission we all carry in terms of helping patients. And in the last setting we had last year, one of the key ones was actually standardization of CAR-T. So look, I'm not a scientist, I'm a physicist, so I can't go to the blood. I'm afraid of blood. But beside that, you know, there are a lot of stuff that we can actually standardize in some common platform or denominator, and CAR-T being one of them. We have embarked upon that last year, and now we have 3 major institutions working together to create a template for the CAR-T. And exactly as Josh said and Heather emphasized, we have a lot of things that we need to do it once and not reinvent the wheel, and follow it with our own proprietary kind of steps of the process. I think one of the key drivers I see that we go in the wrong way sometimes is we're too afraid of what is really IP, what is not. And in order to break that, we need to talk more. We need to break the silos. We need to have better conversation and more open conversation and candid conversation, because, you know, scientists, they are absolutely phenomenal what they do. but sometimes they get too scared to be losing the proprietary part of what they do. So really opening it and learning from the wrongdoings, I think is a good starting point. I mean, I talked to one of my dear colleagues in US, and he said, look, we spent 4 years on this this indication, and it didn't go anywhere, so we had to shut it down. And I said, what did you do with all the data and experience and everything you collected? He said, well, that's the sad part of it. We actually put our effort for past 2.5 months to put everything so we can share with the world. And they were stopped. First of all, none of the 35 major publications in the world want to touch it because they said, we don't want to publicize something that hasn't been successful. And secondly, the institution stopped them, say, look, we don't want to be associated with failure. And this is just really wrong mindset. We don't need this kind of stuff. We need to be open. We need to share. We need to come out of the cocoon that is a zero-sum game. We all need to contribute to the place that we all survive, and that's cell and gene therapy, because we are there for the good of patients. So if we come out of the shell of being a little bit more centered around ourselves and thinking for the greater good, I think we're going to be a better place. But look, I can't go to the science part of it, and I think Josh and Heather covered it very well, but I believe we need to start sharing, talking, and beyond just white papers. I think Heather is right. I mean, we share all these stuff, but sometimes we don't share the things that matter most, but maybe is insignificant in some people's view. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Alexander, I think you're right. And I'm sorry.
Okay.
You made a point on something that I very critically overlooked. The amount that we learn when we are not successful is almost more precious than the times that we are successful. I don't know how many inventors, including Thomas Edison, said, I learned 100 ways not to make a light bulb, and then all of a sudden I make it right. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that is the most effective component of the scientific method. And when we are able to strip down the ego and put that out there, the rest of the industry as thought leaders should be able to kind of circle around the table and then figure out how to make something successful. So thank you for calling that out. You're 100% correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the Edson is my motto in that one. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, can I move on to the next question, which I'm interested to get the thoughts of Kevin on this one specifically, because I would like to know, are there any compelling examples of how early adoption of advanced analytics has transformed manufacturing outcomes in CGT, particularly for the smaller players?
Well, sure. Great discussion so far. Glad to be part of it. I would like to add at the very beginning that for the first question, that we talked a lot about data with sharing within a single institution, but really the power, and Alexander sort of alluded to it, is the handoffs across, and nothing in the CGT space is one organization alone. It's several. And you think of all the handoffs, that's where things fail. So, everyone has their own form, their own chain of custody, their own labels. Those can all be standardized and should be standardized, right? Cellular starting material itself. Everyone has their own proprietary way of collecting it or wanting you to collect it. But at the end of the day, you need a certain number of cells served in a certain concentration, either fresh or frozen. It's not that complicated. So I just wanted to add that it's not just within your organization, it's across organizations, and that's where ultimately where the failure points are. And if you're not doing process improvement, right, then if my lab is doing something different than Heather's lab, and Heather has there's better outcomes with her cells, how does the system learn if I don't know I'm using 10 I'm making this up, 10 DMSO and she's using 5 and or whatever. So I think those handoffs right now, we're so worried about holding on to things that we're missing out on the opportunities to optimize across groups. From an analytics standpoint, everything's in an early stage. of analytics. How many at ISCT, how many people said most of our data we're just leaving on the table? We don't even collect it, right? So I would say the early adopters, the real benefits of the analytics, if you don't have an all-in-one solution that kind of does that, is where you begin to chunk out at least critical information, right? And you look for markers. Very high. I have an informatics background, but basically at the end of the day, are things going up, or things going down, or are things holding steady? And if you don't have the primary data, you use surrogate data for that, like oxygen consumption or something like that. And so I would say being able to take critical data, and again, I'm going to use the across the spectrum, not just manufacturing, the status of the donor, the status of the cells, and their exhaustion potential and their development potential. The more we know those things, makes sense and helps inform manufacturing optimization. What happened if I'm as a primarily a CSM provider, I don't know that information, and you're doing an NK cell and NKR CAR, and you're getting a failure point. Well, is it your manufacturing, or is it because there's a problem with the starting material because NKs are really fickle and the collection or the donor hasn't been optimized for that? So I think the real success is where that partnership is. I know a little bit of, I don't know everything, but I know a little bit about my component of the world, and the manufacturer knows a little bit of theirs, even if it's the broadest endpoint outpoint sort of things. And then it's an iterative process, right? The more I learn from you, I go back and I go, oh, well, then let me look at expansion success markers. Let me look at exhaustion markers. And then together we can identify a better cell type or cell source that leads to improved success.
Together being the operative word there, you're saying sharing is compulsory. Dalip, are you in agreement there with Kevin?
And thank you. Glad to be here on a Friday morning. It's an amazing discussion starting here. We started talking about the standardization, and I will focus on analytics a lot because I'm in the ISCT PAD group as a co-chair, and for the last 3 years, we're talking about analytics, and we just got recently accepted AI machine learning paper summarizing, first of all the definitions of AI machine learning analytics, and the examples and case study of advanced analytics, like you mentioned, Rob, and what Kevin is talking about. But when we talk about standardization, the first one, I think digital systems are critical to capture the data. Before standardization, we want to talk about the structure of the data. Because when we talk about, we want to have standardization, we want to talk about different kind of data analytics, predictive analytics, the structured data is also missing. People collect data on paper, spreadsheets. Some people have MES system. So that's very different structure when we think about all these standardizations. So I think that structure of multimodal data and that as a priority before standardization should be a key component as we think about it. Coming to advanced analytics. So when we think about analytics, I would say we can think of in-process analytics and some of the things that Kevin mentioned as QC control or the release testing. So one or two examples that I'll share, which could be adopted by early developers, is when they're thinking about their processes, they're thinking a lot about how do I make sure my cells have good number, good viability, and good phenotype. Very commonly that you will hear that. And there is less focus on, and it's increasing now, on how do I put in-process controls on analytics, which are markers of those parameters, right? Whether you're looking at glucose, lactase, dissolved oxygen, you can look at pH, ammonia, like all those components. It becomes a multivariable analysis. So some of those things are being set up. And one of the example I'll say for 8-Path Consortium in Europe, they are developing an AI-powered CAR T manufacturing system. So they are putting a system of automated manufacturing controls to understand how robotics can help us with manufacturing, along with soft sensors to understand what data has been collected and processed for decision making. So this is something I'm thinking it's very exciting. How it will help early adopters, maybe they can learn not the whole system, but some components of it, how they can apply to their manufacturing process. The other interesting example, I have multiple examples, just I'll touch one or two, which was presented by Alex Sargent on optimization of perfusion-based system for a T-cell culture using the in-process analytics. That can be applied to automated systems. The question remains, yes, you can get the data, you can make a decision on it. The decision currently is made by humans, and I think that makes sense from a regulatory and liability perspective. Can that be automated enough so a human can say yes or no on a machine rather than doing the analysis? So from an advanced analytics, things are happening, a lot of things happening from PAT, process analytical technologies and machine learning perspective. And you will hear, I'm hearing more and more at conferences, and it will continue to evolve in my mind.
And I would actually argue against for a moment that all of this analytical push that we're putting within a process, which is critically important to understand the cell number, the phenotypes coming out, the different markers, totally agree. But at the end of the day, what's really going to help small and emerging developers are analytics to run an operation. These companies are failing because they actually don't know how to run a business very well. I would argue inventory management, what you're doing within your organization in terms of scheduling and flow of your manufacturing runs, that's actually even more important. I would argue there's a lot of tools and systems that can get the requisite number, viability, and phenotypes out, and we're just analyzing this to death, and we're trying to say, we'll let the machine learning tweak this system. Honestly, most of it doesn't matter. People are using a different cocktail of reagents, but they're basically the same, just different vendors. We're getting the cells that we need. I don't think the companies are set up to actually run a company well and deliver the doses to the patients when they need. So that's my take on the small and emerging developers and where we could help them with analytics is running their business.
I'd like to riff on that a little bit. Sorry, Alexander. If you look at baseball, and I apologize for using a sports analogy, but there's not that much primary data in baseball. Number of players, number of strikes, balls, outs, bases, runs, that kind of thing, innings. But look at a sports page, or I guess that's antiquated. Look on a sports website. Look at all of the data about hits against a left-hander, hits against a right-hander, hits in critical. It's all the metadata that's critical to optimizing. And to your point, Josh, the business of baseball, if we're going to succeed, I got to make sure the right person is pitching or the right person is hitting against that pitcher in a critical moment. And it's about the metadata. And here we are talking about the primary data. And the small companies are trying to gather the primary data, but that doesn't drive business optimization. That's just an attribute. It's the metadata that ultimately drives success.
But gentlemen, isn't it a both and? Why does it have to be one or the other as the main focus? And maybe that's where we're doing it wrong. And we have been doing it wrong for the last 10, 15, 20 years. We've been focusing only on the clinical components or only on the logistical components. And I think that's part of where a lot of support with the automation of these areas has fallen short for the folks that are doing the Lord's work here. Because we do part of it really well, and then somebody else does that part really well. But let's go back to the original point. If you don't have the continuum of information being shared across multiple organizations, because we each have our part in the story, and you don't have all of the data required, because it is all intertwined, I think you're missing vital components. You need what Josh talked about to run the business and be successful as a small business and grow and scale. But you also need all of those clinical components to be able to understand and ensure that you have a viable quality product on the other side that people are still going to want to buy in the first place.
Alexander.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to talk on behalf of Heather, and I haven't prepared it in behalf of her, but look, I mean, she's coming from scientific perspective, and there's one thing that I'm sure Heather is going to smile and say, absolutely right. Still in 2025, to be absolutely exact, in 23rd of May 2025, in the edge of technology, in the edge of that, there is no one without mobile phone. Even people like they are 6 years old, they have a mobile phone, right? We have technology in our fingertips. Today, Heather and I, we go in front of clients, super smart people, I mean, I can never even challenge to be ever smart as them. And we're still arguing that you need to collect your data digitally. You don't need to use pen and paper. You don't need to memorize stuff, you know? And at the same time, they are talking. So these people, they're not even convinced that digital is needed. And at the same time, they're talking about, you know, industry 4.0, 5.0. For God's sake, we are not even in 1.0. And I argue we are not even 0.10, right? So the matter of fact is you need to have a data, and Kevin is absolutely right, that fine art of metadata, that fine of any data, it's absolutely crucial. And coming back to what Josh said, to be able to run a business, look, I can't be scientist. I've run a lot of businesses, so something I can do well, but something it's not in my DNA nor my interest, right? So scientists are great what they do, but they need to understand running a business is completely different. I mean, we're all running our businesses and we know what it means, right? So having that really visibility, control, and trust that the organization is flowing correctly to the right direction needs information. The information cannot reside in a source. It needs to be cascaded and catenated throughout. And the only way of doing it, there is no other way. The telepathy is not there yet, but the digital form of capturing, analyzing, and harnessing that power is very important. And at the same time, I want to add something about data. We always talk about data and we say data is key. No, data is nothing if you don't know what knowledge you want to extract out of it. This, you know, I came from telecom industry, and for decades, they have collected petabytes and terabytes and gigabytes of data. And now suddenly after 20, 30 years, they sat down and said, what do we do with this? No, you can't do much about it. You need to architecture the design of knowledge that you want to get out of it before you start collating data. So now, unfortunately, in cell and gene therapy, I see very often that people are say, okay, let's collect the data and do something with it later. No, you need to already from beginning do it. And also on that token, we need to, when we do the science, we need to find out our processes and everything around it. It's better to start earlier than later. I've seen a lot of companies, and recently some of them, unfortunately, they couldn't sustain the business. For years, they went around science. It was hundreds of millions of dollars invested in those companies. They never captured the data. And at the end, when they went, you know, bust, what do they have to show for? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Is
Okay,
duty of care.
I want to bring Dalip in really quickly. He's had his hands up for
Sure.
questions.
Yeah, no, it is.
I saw your hand too. So.
I'll just summarize it in my mind. Those are all good points. So what I heard and I summarize, and I would agree with that. To run a good business, you need a good scientific data, because for the companies to survive, if they don't have good clinical edge, if your main lead product goes on a clinical hold or if fails in clinical trial, you do not have a business. Yes, you do need a business strategy, you need a business CRM, those exist, and you need a different skill set in your company to run the business. But the data, in my mind, the data becomes the key, the scientific data, and the business systems goes around it to be successful with the skill set in the company.
Kevin, did you have something you wanted to add quickly before we move on?
Yeah, just very quickly that since there is a bit of a trust issue, especially across organizations, I guess that's going to be my soapbox on this group today. Maybe there are tools like sandboxes where I can have my proprietary information, you can have your proprietary information, and we put it in a sandbox. We can both see the outcome, but I don't actually get to see all of your data, and you don't get to see all of my data. So that may be a transition step to get to where I think we're all leading to.
A compromise.
Yeah.
Of sorts.
Very good suggestion.
Okay, so how does that let's say we get improved transparency between therapy developers. How does that translate into into tangible improvements in the supply chain or in donor coordination? Dalip, I'm going to come straight back to you on this one.
Yeah, so when we think about, yeah, again, this is transparency and data can also help here, right? So when we think about transparency in data, one of the things what I heard, and Kevin can jump in and talk about, people are not able to find slots for apheresis collections, right? What do you hear? Like people who are new companies coming up, existing companies have their systems in place and they have all the relationships with the big hospitals, with the donor centers, and they're getting the slots, I'm assuming, with a priority, and the other companies which are coming with new trials, they're not able to get the slots. So the question would be that information, how they can get new slots. This comes to that transparency of the supply chain. So blood centers and hospitals can play a pivotal role in sharing the information in the systems that they're putting in place for these companies, and these companies can understand the controls, the quality system that the blood centers and hospitals have, so they can go to them and find them as an alternative rather than going to the same big hospitals or centers to find their slots. So I'm focusing only on the supply chain of the donor availability or the slot availability for apheresis, which has been one of the critical. I'm sure there are a lot of other components we can talk about, but if I focus about that, that is one. And I'll just talk about a data analytic piece there, which is very interesting. So I know NMDP published a paper on how they can do donor matching based on their algorithm. Say they published an algorithm where they can do a donor matching. So that donor matching from the allogenic side and then slot matching from an autologous side is something which I think more transparency, more discussion can bring benefits to this space.
Josh?
Yeah, I mean, from the supply chain end of things, right? As we all, as an industry, hopefully share our successes, also our failures, as Heather and Alexander talked about, critical to talk about where did these companies, fail? What was that Achilles heel? Was it because they couldn't get the apheresis donor slots? And what, as an industry, can we do to give a runway to those groups, right? Or at least teach them, here's what you need to do. Here's how early you need to get in line. As a tool and reagent supplier, I think the more the industry can, again, I think, I think Alexander, you brought it up, this idea of standardizing CAR T, right? It's kind of the most prominent. We've treated the most patients. There's the most commercialized products. How can we, as a group, share what's working well, what's consistently showing up on time and at the right specs for these companies to be able to manufacture their CAR Ts in the 4,000 per year. We're eyeing 30,000 per year, patient populations for individual drugs now. It's going to be critical to make sure that there is some standardization and knowledge about, okay, these are the tools, these are the reagents, these are the systems that are working at this scale, and then others can adopt that. And the people that are making these systems, making these products, can actually plan for, okay, I see where the field is going, I'm going to beef up my systems, because it's all a big ecosystem. Again, from the collection and Terumo's technology that they're going to continue to need to build and provide more instruments everywhere, to the software systems that need to interconnect everything. And then, again, from my side on the reagent and the device side, we need to build and plan for this ongoing success of cell therapy, which is moving up into front lines. So again, I like the idea of saying, let's share what's not working so we don't continue to waste the same amount of money. $100 million, one company going after CD19 CAR, trying to do something a little unique, failed. Why did you fail? Could you at least share that information so the next 10 groups that are trying to do the same thing don't have the same fate?
Okay, I just want to pick up on a point you made there, Josh. I'm interested in what your thoughts are, everybody's thoughts are really, on what specific systems or practices could be put in place to ensure continued two-way communication, making sure that no IP protections aren't breached.
Yeah. So if I may jump in there, this is something which Kevin mentioned. I really like that idea, right? If you can have a digital platform, sandboxes where people have role-based access, right? Data is like summarized, structured in a metadata format, right? And you have access to, there's no donor data available, there's no patient data available, that's like HIPAA compliant. So that way that data is, and Kevin can definitely, being an MD and he can speak more about it. So from that perspective, so that data is already blinded, but even that blinded data have a digital access level for everyone. Then the other thing which have not been utilized in cell and gene therapy space, and we study a lot in our business schools, is the blockchain technology, how blockchain technology could be utilized to share this data. Sounds like a crazy idea, but it's not, because it's used for beef production all the way. In Wyoming, they have actually said, like, there's a called beef chain where they track all the way from cattle all the way to the table, and they can certify it's grass fed, it's organic. So if they can do it, like we can do it in cell and gene therapy space, if beef chain can happen, blockchain can definitely happen. And then we talk about all those like digital twins, and so that all the concept, I think blockchain in my mind, and then role-based access with sandboxes sounds like something that can help share data with IP protection in my mind.
Okay, so Dalip's got beef. Alexander, what?
Yeah, you, as he hit the nail in the head. So definitely, look, we have so many technologies like distributed ledger, blockchain, we're using it in our system. And from day one where we started, I said, look, guys, you cannot possibly mention blockchain or distributed ledger because immediately everybody associates to Bitcoin, which I don't want to have in my company, right? But these technologies are proven. Today, you can use completely immutable with complete provenance about every single action happening in the process, from a security, from access point of view, from storage, from all different perspectives. And we must not shy away from technology. It's a challenge. Both myself and Heather, we see every day. People are not open for technology. Look, 20 years ago, without disclosing my age, we were talking about if you want to have on-premise or cloud. I mean, a lot of industries has gone over that hurdle. Today, everybody using cloud. Why? Because you do something absolutely perfect, and then you distribute that perfection crossover. You monetize it crossover, right? So we need to be, and the sandboxing Kevin mentioned is just beautiful. I mean, today, what he's saying is not a dream. It can be literally reality today. Look, one of the holy grail of the industry is how can I make manufacturing as such to create increased accessibility and make a profit out of it. Nobody has broken that, right? I mean, we've seen, I'm not going to mention the names of companies who've gone market authorization with 3 drug products after billions. They just went bust, right? You know what I'm talking about. But look, why? Because there's a holy grail. But when somebody finds it, good on to them, and they can seek IP, whatever. But that needs to be in a certain level shared with others. Because if the industry can progress, unanimously cross over with a good success, all of us, we're going to be good at it. Look, Apple had a number of decades of problem, right? And Bill Gates, he personally saved Apple a couple of times, as far as I know, because he said it's better to have somebody worthy as a competitor rather than have nobody to compete with, because it becomes stealth and you die out. We need to promote each other. We need to encourage each other, and we need to work together. Once again, digital platform capturing, forget about digital, use the technology you use every day in this field. I mean, why not? Why shy away from it, right?
Fair point. Heather, anything to add
Yeah,
there?
fully agree here. So we can either develop in isolation or we can collaborate and accelerate. I think we need to remember exactly why we are all in this industry in the first place. We are attempting to bring life-saving therapies to patients faster, greater, and cheaper. That is why we do what we do. In order to do it better, we need to have large data cohorts. When you have an N of 2 or an N of 20, you have a little bit of data. You kind of understand what needs to happen, but we need N sizes that are massive. And that calls us all to be more agnostic. I think we have an opportunity, specifically each and every one of us on this panel, but also through the industry, to take a look at ourselves and our companies and determine, are we really team players? Are we here for the right reason? Is my software agnostic enough that I can integrate with somebody else's software so that we can then assist with this data sharing and this common language? Is my device agnostic enough that it can then integrate and automate so that the clinicians can put more information in and we can collect that? Do we have enough folks calling for a portal or a sandbox, very similar to what CIBMTR has, for all of the picture so that we can then start to do more deep analyzing and understand what this looks like? That's kind of where my brain is going through this whole process. I think we all need to understand that we're part of the collection of that end number. And how are we going to then change what we do to ensure that we are part of the solution instead of the problem?
Yep.
Kevin.
So I'm going to abstract the conversation one bit up. Heather, what you said kind of made me think of something. A lot of us have N of one or two or just a small set of data. It doesn't scale, right? So basically, a lot of our therapies wind up being a minefield made in heaven. If you happen to have a system that's been optimized around your genetics, you do well. But what we fail to forget in our models is wild type amongst humans doesn't mean that everyone's consistent. We're not a bunch of inbred rats that have the same genetic material. There's an infinite variety, and it's compound complex. So the more data that you have, the more different types of donors, patients, whatever that you have that go into your system that you can learn to adjust accordingly to optimize the back end, the better off it'll be and the better it actually will scale. And I think the failures of manufacturing will go down. I think, Josh, you were sort of alluding to some of this early on, because if you optimize it for my cells, you've optimized it for my cells, not for the 8-9 billion people across the world.
Exactly.
That's a very good point, actually. So we're all in agreement that partnerships or access agreements are necessary to build useful models in cell and gene therapy. Can we be a bit more specific on what kinds of partnerships?
Can I be very dairy here? And I think you guys are going to hate me forever. I mean, Josh loves me because he's my friend, but you guys are my friend as well. But hey, look, the point is, we have this recording, and I think I'm really enjoying it. You guys are just awesome. And then you become my role model to become as awesome as you guys are. But look, we do this recording, we publicize it, people listen to it, and they say, well, great stuff, right? But what happens is in 6 months to 3 months, it fades away, right? It's yet another talk. It was amazing. I mean, good to listen. These guys are awesome, beside Alexander, right? That's perfect. How about I call out and I say, all of us in this call, let's start a project of collaboration together. Very small. It doesn't need to be big. Very, very small. Absolutely everything and more what you said, but very contained, very small. Show it that we walk the talk, that we can actually, from different parts of the industry, people who, we don't have competition in our vocabulary. We say other players in the market, like myself and Heather. I mean, we are dear friends. We become dear friends. But look, we can actually work together for the greater of the industry. Even we take one small step, 1 millimeter of step forward, that shows the point that everybody can do it, right? So that's what I call out. I mean, look, I'm happy to do it. I'm sure you guys are happy to do it, but I'm sure we all are busy and we have other priorities. But if we have what Heather said, what Kevin echoed, and all of you guys agree, if we have the duty of care to what we have passion about and what we are committed about, why not doing it? I know there are many other stuff important and urgent, but let's prioritize the importance. The importance is to change the way we do what we do. as a dear friend of mine said, Alexander, you talk about the why all the time. I'm a summer cynic guy, right? And he said, look, forget about the why. We all have the same why. The things that makes us different is the how, right? So let's show the how in a commonality and same kind of, we need to do something very small, but just make the point.
Now there's a call to action from Alexander. Is everyone on board? I'll do my part by publishing this conversation, but feel free to jump in and respond.
I think he's right. I think we need to do something like this. I think the original question that you had, what type of partnerships do we often see? We see partnerships that are safe. We see partnerships where folks have friends or commonalities in very like-minded organizations, small or large, where they feel like they can trust the folks on the other side of the table to a certain degree. That's great. Those coalitions are important and they're finite. So until we do something like Alexander's talking, where we've got a bunch of different folks from the gamut across the industry on the same call who may or may not be competitors, and we still come together and we still do this partnership and we still find synergy and make this work, that's where the change is going to happen. We have to be the change that we're looking to see.
Yeah, and for that, I would say that's a great call out, Alexander. Those are the societies, and I'm putting a plug for ISCD here. Those are the society. There has to be a neutral third party to hold that data, because all of us here and maybe a bigger group may have some competing interests, which is totally natural, being aligned with an association or a company. So those nonprofit organizations like ISCT, and I'm coming back to that AI machine learning paper. There are like 15 authors on that. Like I corresponded the paper all across the industry, and people contribute. And that's what I say in that society or in that chairing as a chair, is like, leave your company hat. We are doing as a scientist. When I go there, I go as a scientist, I go as a researcher and not as a company representative. And let's see what we are doing in the industry. So that call out you have, Alexander, that the same discussion is happening in ISCT. Can we have a common data set where people can feed information? So I will encourage us to use that outlet. So there's no conflict of interest for people who are like potentially competing or non-competing. But the question would be, if it's going to ISCT and they are taking that data out as a public domain, it brings more credibility. I think it removes that conflict of interest in my mind for different organizations.
I like where you're going, Dalit, with that, and I appreciate your involvement and commitment to the ISCT committees. There's other great programs, ARM committees.
Yeah.
Again, talking like we are, but I like Alexander's note about walking the talk, and one thing that we've tried to do, we're trying to do that. We tried to bring very disparate, I would say not like-minded or very different style companies together. That's kind of what we did with Scale Ready, and then we've tried to walk the talk with our grant program that we've been running now for a year. And we're basically, hey, call to action to any technology, reagent, device, anybody who feels like they have something to add to the greater good that we could bring to the mix if somebody is trying to get a product into the clinic and moving through faster. What can you bring to the table, both in terms of actual, free material? I mean, we're going as far as, the full free material, but then your knowledge and understanding, and I'll call out other tool and tech providers to say, if you feel, may the best tech win, right? Put it into the mix. Let's all try to give everybody the opportunity to use all the tools, and wherever the technology shines, that's going to be the standard. So if you feel confident in what you're doing, share that. And again, I would say I like we're also big on the infinite game here, Alexander. So we could talk about that some other time.
I mean,
Okay,
I agree to
get a quick response from you. Sorry, Alexander. Just
one off the thing. I know John, I know Josh. I mean, they are just phenomenal people. I mean, forget about the business; they are successful. I don't care about that. But what they are walking is exactly what we all need to walk. It is about contributing. It's not about just making money. That's the thing which is really unique. I think what you guys are doing is just phenomenal. But yeah.
Thanks, Alexander. Kevin, quick word from you before we move to our
Yeah, I
closing?
was just going to say lots of ways that we could work together, but I'm wondering if it's worth, even under the rubric of ISCT, that we look to see about nomenclature standardization with groups like Odyssey. Doesn't have to be them, because if we're going to walk the walk and talk the talk, that means that we're going to have to learn how to share data across. And if your information, I mean, I run an IT program, I built IT solutions, and everyone has their own favorite nomenclature. And so it takes interface engines and all sorts of things to get things to go. But if we set to a standard, then that would begin to allow us to share, even if it ultimately is in a sandbox, because you know, Dilip talked about metadata, but you still have to know what my data is, right? Is it a blood glucose level? What's a BC? If you don't know, it's a, you know, if I call blood glucose that. So maybe that's something that's innocuous enough, but still moves it forward across the industry, that we're going to at least begin to standardize how we name things when we externalize it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap up. Some closing thoughts. Secrecy in cell and gene therapy manufacturing. What needs to happen apart from everybody doing as Alexander asks a little earlier? Heather, can you kick us off?
I think it needs to start with a commitment where we all fully understand and return back to our roots of why we're here, just like I said before. But it's also what we've all have been saying. When we have that commitment to do what we do in the right way for the right purpose, and we then demonstrate it to Alexander's point, we then start to make a ripple effect within this industry. The secrets need to diminish. We are all able as professionals and business individuals to maintain some form of proprietary information that makes us unique. But it is our responsibility to generalize and anonymize some of that so that we have the capability of sharing, and we commit to doing that to pursue those best practices.
Thank you. Alexander?
I agree with everything you said. Look, I told you earlier that I don't believe in competition, but actually I lied. I believe it. I have one competitor, okay, and I'm trying to find that guy, and I cannot do it. You know who's my competitor? Pen and paper. Heather is not my competitor because we're all doing the same thing. So we're doing a little bit differently. Good on you. Good on all of us. For me, doing the same thing, expecting different outcome, that's insanity. And we need to come out of that mindset. So at the end of the day, I go a little bit off, a little bit right. I give something which I shouldn't. Who cares? At the end, if we all go one step forward, that's what we need to do. And exactly as all of you lovely people said, we need to think about the greater good. We cannot possibly play the game that creates wars and atrocity of zero-sum game. We all can be prosperous. We all can be sleeping sound at night. We say, what Heather has done, what I have done, what Dalio has done, what Josh has done, Kevin, we brought 5 milliseconds. We brought 5 minutes, 5 hours to somebody's life. What more can you possibly get in life for satisfaction more than that? So we need to roll up the sleeves, not talk, but do it. We need to work together. That together we can do many, many things. Separately, we can do fine art. So I would say call for action, not for all of us here, but for everybody in the industry. Please start talking to each other, not just through conferences, but proactively out. Call people to work, reach out to people, so who cares? We cannot share the patient data. That's a holy grail. We cannot just touch that. But anything else from our businesses, if we help somebody else, isn't it good satisfaction to help people? Seriously? That's it. I hold peace.
Kevin?
I only thing I would add is we're kind of lazy in what we throw under the word secret. That could include your pride and your ego in the things that you've developed. And lots of people want to share and standardize as long as it's around my thing. And we want to die on hills. that probably Josh said it really well early on, probably doesn't make a bit of difference, and then oftentimes might actually be less efficient. So a little bit of humility coming into it and realizing not everything you want to lump under a secret is a secret.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, and this is where I think everybody, and I love, and Alexander says lovely people and amazing. I'm sure Alexander is the wonderful, one of the best guys here on the panel.
I
One
doubt
of one of the things we talk about is like, yes, IP protection is a key for the companies to survive and thrive and get money for themselves. So that makes sense to have your IP. But I'll go a little bit more tactical, is there are steps in process data, right? You can talk about how are you collecting process data, share those case studies, because you can share the examples of what did not work and what worked, like we've been talking about it multiple times here, but be specific enough so they are talking about a concrete example so people to have a takeaway. Because if you talk at a like at 50,000 feet level, people do not, like, anybody who's in that room is like, yes, that was a great talk, like Alexander said, but they don't get the information. So go a little bit more tactical, share those case studies, publish those case studies with whichever society, whatever consortium you're part of. So that starts to open up the curtain a bit for people to understand without giving the whole secret sauce away. So that will be my call to action, is like, let's share a little bit of more what are you doing with your processes. How are you thinking? Start sharing your thought process and your case studies and how you worked on it will be a good place to start without giving us the house away or the whole yard away.
And Josh.
Yeah, beyond the blockchain to beef chain, which I have lots of questions, Dalip, and maybe we can get into the CAR T chain or something. But from my perspective, and I love where everybody's at here, it's the construct is key. You know, there's your IP, right? It's the genetic sequence and the design of said construct. I would argue that the cell culture pieces, the way you actually, you know, collect the material from the patient and get it through your process and then get it to the patient. That's not where you should be trying to find your uniqueness. Share what's working as a group, and let's again standardize where possible, but at least publicize and share some of that information. I think operational excellence is where the cream will rise to the top for these companies. So those are the companies which are going to be successful. And again, it all comes down to the science, of course. Do you have a construct that's working? Does your genetic sequence and how you make that work? Beyond that, how fast and how consistent, how repeatable and how efficient can you be in running your operation? That's going to be the key. So those pieces are what we need to stop, you know, holding to our chest and being secretive, because yes, when these companies that have amazing, promising technology and science that looks amazing, when they fail, we all need to learn from that as an industry, or we're just going to keep going way too slow. It's way too slow for my liking, and I think everybody here.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, great. And what I have learned today is that when it comes to the development of life-saving therapies, honesty really does seem to be the best policy to progress forward. That is all we have time for today. All that remains is for me to thank our esteemed speakers, Heather, Alexander, Kevin, Josh, and Dalip. Thank you all very much, and I hope to speak to you again